Welcome back to NeuroDiverse Christian Couples. I am hosting alone today, Dr. Stephanie Holmes. Dan, my co-host and husband, is not able to join us today, but we have a great guest that I wanted to put on the NDCC labeling and brand, Rhonda Noordyk. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to talk about a very difficult topic because we're going to talk about divorce a little bit and financial and some things that happen that women need to know going through a divorce. But before we go there, I think it's kind of important to kind of establish who you are. So we got to talk a little bit about yourself, your marriage, your belief in marriage. You're a believer. So let's kind of start this with like who you are and kind of before we get into how you got into what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Rhonda Noordyk. I am based in Wisconsin, but really serve women all over the country. So I actually have been married for almost 25 years this year. I got married at 22. My husband was 23. We kind of joke that we went on our honeymoon and couldn't buy a car, or rent a car because we were 25. So we rented bikes and shuttled, and that was before Uber. So we were just like, how are we going to get there? I guess we're going to shuttle. And we have three daughters, so 18, 17, and 14, almost 15. So yeah, three teenage daughters. And basically, believe in marriage. Think that there are certainly believe in the institution of marriage. I know that for me, it certainly has not been easy, but with having God at the center of our relationship and having a husband really who's seeking after what God has for him has certainly been pinnacle in our relationship.
Well, I want to ask you a question that I get because I'm an ordained minister and I'm a Christian counselor and Christian life coach. And when I broach the topic of divorce in any way, I may get a question, Stephanie, how can you do this? How can you even talk about divorce if you claim to be pro-marriage? You're an ordained minister. And so I'm going to answer the question for myself, and then I'm going to ask you, maybe that question comes to you. How can you be a believer and helping women who are going through divorce? So the answer that I will give, because I got an email that was threatening to call my credentials based on some of the podcasts that I've done where we have addressed it. And I say, go ahead. The person who's in charge of my credentials is also a licensed professional counselor and clinical psychologist, in addition to being the director of where I'm credentialed. So go ahead and share those podcasts with them. That will be okay. Because in my credentialing, we are open to divorce, not just for adultery, but for unrepentant abuse and unrepentant addiction and emotional and physical abandonment. So there are more reasons that one can leave their marriage when there's been a lack of repentance and repeated abuse over and over. And I'm going to define abuse in a moment. So from my standpoint, I am for marriage. And as Leslie Vernick would say, she says, I'm for the institution of marriage, but not to the detriment of the people in them. Jesus died for people. He didn't die for institutions. So every person, every Christian woman I know got married for the purpose of staying married and thought they would be cherished and had no idea that there could be some kind of abuse in her future. So you don't get married thinking you're going to divorce. And so, but we sometimes have to tackle this very difficult topic in the church because you get the big scarlet D, like it is the unforgivable sin. So that's kind of for me. I want to help marriage and I want to support marriage. But then when someone is being abused, you sometimes need a guide out of that situation. So how do you tackle that as a believer, specifically in the field that you're in, which is helping divorced women or women going through a divorce with their finances?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is a heavy one, right? I mean, I think at the end of the day, my answer to that question, because I have gotten it before, certainly, right, is first of all, God hates divorce. But the reason that I believe he hates it is because it's awful. And I found that God was calling me to help women that were in these really difficult, challenging, lonely situations, provide guidance for them. And my answer to them is not get divorced. my answer to them is, okay, let's try to get you the help that you need. Let's help you be empowered so that you can make really good decisions. And I had to do a lot of soul searching around that because I've never been divorced. I don't, advocate for divorce, but I will tell you that in doing that, I can tell you that I hate abuse. And I will die on that hill. I hate abuse. It's not fair. It's not right. And so, I come alongside and walk alongside women that are in these really challenging situations, providing them guidance and direction. And and I will also caveat that by saying, I do not hate men. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to, there's a small handful of people that I start working with that are able to reconcile and stay married. And we celebrate that. And I'm happy for them. And, but again, if women are going to be, and people are going to be going through divorce, I will tell you that I want to be in their corner. I want to be that person that is loving on them, who's patient with them, who's kind with them, who's advocating for them. That's me. And I had a woman, a story just came to my mind. I had a friend who had gone through divorce and really felt like she really, like you said, had that, kind of scarlet letter, right, on her, the big D, right? And she just really felt like she was alone. And she said, Rhonda, you were the only one, not my pastor, not the leadership, not my friends, right? Rhonda, you were the one who showed me God's love through this time. And I didn't even realize necessarily that all of that was going on. I mean, she was pretty private about some of that stuff, but later on she told me, Rhonda, now that I'm on the other side of it, I can really see that you showed God's love to me. And I thought, that's for me what this is all about, standing in the gap, and being that voice of calm, caring kindness that people need when they're going through something as difficult or as challenging as abuse.
Yeah, because God hates divorce, but he hates abuse too.
That's right.
Jesus was for women and children. He was for the innocent. He was for the downtrodden. So while we love marriage and divorce is difficult and a painful thing to go through, abuse lifelong is not acceptable either. So listeners, kind of hang with me a little bit because I want to I'm reading this from Mending the Soul, which is a workbook for healing from abuse. And this is called The Wheel of Abuse. And I want to read the ones that I specifically see in complex marriages where someone is married to someone with a personality disorder, such as narcissism or autism, Asperger's, in a neurodiverse relationship. So I'm just going to read some of these out. And again, this is coming from Mending the Soul, page 64. Emotional neglect. The abuser is failing to provide affection, psychological care, withholds affection and withholds positive things that are needed. Verbal, the abuser puts the person down, corrects, denounces, ignores, yells at, insults, curses, maintains an attitude of entitlement, and is engaged in constant criticism. Economic, which we're going to delve into a little bit more, where the abuser limits the victim's financial independence, either by preventing him or her from working, preventing the person from having financial resources or access to resources, controlling the budget, requiring an accounting for every penny spent and making a person turn in receipts. Stonewalling, the abuser will use silence as a weapon, avoids answering questions, halts a conversation, repeats inconsequential information, repeats phrases, refuses to change opinion, perception, evades and avoids. It's an overt deception, may not be an outright lie, but might not give you the information you need. Humiliation, the abuser asserts power over another person through hostile humor, sarcasm, public or private humiliation. The abuser might belittle the victim's appearance, parenting, domestic skills, erotic humiliation, gaining even sexual arousal from humiliating another person. This one I see a lot in Christian homes. The abuser, if he is a husband or father, sees himself as the supreme authority of the home. He asserts his spiritual authority in terms of power, which emphasizes submission or obedience from his spouse. He will disregard the feelings and opinions of his wife and children. He shows contempt for any form of emotion. He humiliates emotion. He elevates the needs of men and him as being head of house over any needs of the women and children. And finally, passive aggression. The abuser is unable to express anger in a healthy way, so uses ambiguous communication patterns, rarely meaning what he says, pretending to forget, gaslights, avoid personal responsibility, blame shifts, acts in an accommodating way in front of others, but does not follow through at home, is inwardly resentful, and rarely will follow through with promises despite making them in agreement, even with a pastor or a counselor. So those are the types of things that I see. So I really want to go into this economic one because many women, specifically married to someone on the spectrum or the combination with narcissism, if finances or money is kind of a special or restricted interest, I usually refer to them as the dragon guarding the gold. And so once it's decided that the woman's going to file, money will be hidden, cash will be hidden, new accounts are coming up. Even though the couple maybe made a decision together, I'm going to work and I want you to stay home and maybe homeschool the kids. Now that she's filed, that money is his. I went to work. I made the money. This is my house. That's my cars. I've provided this lifestyle and will go down fighting, driving up lawyer bills, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for the insane reason just to not let her have it. This is supposedly someone 5 minutes ago, I loved you until you filed divorced, and now you are the enemy. So talk a little bit about what a CDFA is first, because people might not know what a CDFA is, and then specifically your niche as to how you help women going through a divorce, why they need specific financial advice in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst is what that credential stands for. And ultimately, I started my company in 2014. I'd been in the financial industry, saw a giant need to be able to stand in the gap for women. We would do women's events and women would come and they would love the education. And then they would say, hey, I went home and I talked to my husband and he said, oh, don't worry about it. We've got a guy. You'll be well taken care of, all of those kinds of things. And I really wanted to be able to help, women navigate through that. So I started my company. And ultimately, the way that I use my CDFA credential is a little bit different than maybe some others. I'm no longer licensed to sell financial products or do financial planning in a traditional sense. I'm not selling insurance anymore. What I'm doing is acting as a strategic partner and an advocate for my clients. And so my engagement with them is usually kind of in that contemplation stage. Hey, Rhonda, I'm not exactly sure what direction I'm going to go, but I really feel like I need to get stuff in order. No problem. So we work kind of behind the scenes, making sure that they can get things situated. And then once the filing happens, it's a matter of, again, having a strategy, making sure that we're navigating through all of the pieces. So that's things like, budgeting and how to gather and organize the documents, what to be looking for. So I have a method that I've been doing for many years that now has a name, and it's called the bridge method. And the bridge method is we breathe and build your team, review and organize the financials, and that includes the budgeting component. Identify the gaps. Are there gaps in information? Are there gaps in transparency? Are there gaps in expertise? So do we need another expert, a forensic accountant, business valuation, private investigator, those kinds of things. Dial in the data. So that's where we're going to take a look at property division and support and try to get our arms around, what the impact of this could be on their bottom line. For stay-at-home moms, the thing there is a lot of times what will happen is they will say, well, she hasn't been working, but she could be. And so we want to attribute a certain amount of income to her, even though she's not technically been working or might not immediately be working. And it's a strategy that sometimes they'll use to reduce the amount of support that's being paid. So I have a specific process that'll help people with in that regard, and analyze really what the bottom line is going to mean for support for both parties so that they can see, actually, yeah, this one party is going to be in the black and the other one's going to be barely breaking even. And so the narrative that we're being told maybe needs to be challenged a little bit, like, oh, I'm going to be, in a one-room efficiency apartment without any furniture, which really might not be the case. And so we want to shed some light on that piece. The guide to finish strong is, okay, how do we make sure that as things are nearing the end, that we have the I's dotted and T's crossed, and that we're thinking through how this is going to impact after. The details do matter. And then the exhale is, how do we create an action plan? And one thing that I want to say is that, and I wrote this down as you were chatting, is I can just speak from my experience. I would say about half of my clients are Christian women who have really struggled with this decision. It's not something that they woke up one day and just said, okay, yep. I mean, it's stuff that's been going on for years. They've often sought guidance and help. And for whatever reason, right, they've decided to go down that path. So it's not something that they take lightly. But one thing that I have seen is that God doesn't leave them. God doesn't say, hey, you're going down to the divorce path. Peace out. I'm out of here. He shows up. He brings me. He brings you. He brings loving, kind people that can help them in a time that's very dark. And he provides for them. I mean, the miracles of things. I was working with a woman who, again, part of an abusive relationship. Her husband was a pilot, controlled all of the finances. She was so anxious about the finances. And as she was going through this process, God opened up a door for her to be able to rent a place. She loved boating. They actually had a boat. She'd done tons of skiing. He opened up a place. Somebody at her kid's school said, hey, actually, I know somebody who's renting out their place. They'll give, and they're willing to do it at a reasonable rate because they want to help you. And so she got to live that kind of first year on a lake with her boat, with her kids, kind of reestablish that place. But God opened that up, and I know that it can be hard for people to get their head around this concept, around, is God going to really provide? But he does. He really does. And so that's kind of the role that I take. I mean, very conscientious about just making sure that I am giving good direction and guidance to women. All the while saying, it's not, hey, we want to take the men out at the knees. But in my mind, we really want to level the playing field. We want to level and create some sense of equality around the economics of the situation.
As I will say in the situations, from the counseling perspective, I've been in counseling for over 25 years now. And usually the thing keeping a woman tied to an abusive relationship is the money and the finances, the fear of money, that me and my children are going to live in poverty. I also want to say, both of us are pretty much saying it's not our job to tell you to go or to stay. But if you are staying because of fear, because of financial, there is hope for that. I mean, I will say in 25 years of marriage, I have suggested or maybe even insisted upon divorce for 5 times. And it was because a child was being physically or sexually abused.
Yep.
It was because the woman was in a domestic violence situation. I was like, if you don't leave, you will die or something will happen to your child, or Child Protective Services will get involved. I mean, that's when I have really been insistent that this cannot stay the same. You need to flee. You are in danger. Your children's in danger. And then for everybody else, I say you've got to work that out between you and God. And so some women don't feel a peace about it. They feel like, I know my theology says adultery only, and it's not adultery, so I can't. I was like, okay, well, let's work with in-home separation or something like that. And then other people will say, I do have peace. For the people who come to me, they've been in counseling 5, 6, 7 times with different counselors, different pastors. So there's already been like a working on the marriage, reading books, going to seminars, going to intensives. But if one party refuses to change, even if they're on the spectrum, you don't get a pass. I was just talking to someone today, and she said her husband would cuss at her and call her names and say, well, I'm on the spectrum. I can't help it. You don't get a pass for cursing at someone and yelling at someone and calling them names because you have a neurological difference. Out of the abundance of the heart speaks. If it wasn't in your heart, you wouldn't speak it. So you need to change your heart. So I do find in many of these situations, and so bringing it back to a neurodiverse couple, if the guy is, because some of them are accountants and financiers themselves, they're in the money business, and so they probably do have assets and wealth and things like that. And the wife isn't always privy to that, because sometimes in Christian marriage, it's like, well, honey, I'll take care of the money. You just trust me. God will provide. I even had one gentleman tell the spouse, she was like, what are we going to do for retirement? We're just going to trust Jesus, honey. Do you not trust Jesus? So there's a reason to bring in a professional. And so in addition to divorce, though, I mean, would someone have to be in a divorce situation, or if they're contemplating it or thinking about separation, or maybe they don't know if their husband is really telling them the truth about their finances, or questions to ask? I mean, is it just women going through divorce, or is it broader for women who want to better their finances or understand what's going on in their finances?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the area where they're kind of contemplating, right? I mean, they don't have to go down the divorce path, but if there is this sense of like, I'm really feeling unsettled, I'm not sure the direction that this is going, we've been doing counseling, I really want to just make sure that I've got my stuff in order, and that I have a good handle on what's going on. Those are certainly people that, I can potentially help. Again, my niche really is, really empowering people that are either contemplating or going through the divorce process. So, I've done a lot of the more general education over the years, but really just felt like this is the place that I'm supposed to be. But again, there's no pressure. Like one of the programs that I offer is 6 months. And there's times when women will start that program because they're like, I just got to get a better handle on the finances. I think that this might be going down that path. I don't know for sure. And they'll get through the 6 months and they don't file. It's not like they're on my timeline or your timeline as far as filing at all. I just want them to have a good understanding of where things are at so that if it does end up going down that path, that they're prepared. And I think that's wise, you know what I mean? Especially when there are these challenging situations. So that's where I would say, again, there are things that can be done kind of behind the scenes, if people are contemplating or considering, going down that path. And the separation part, I mean, one of the things that I have seen, and maybe you've seen this too, is particularly in, the Christian sphere, a lot of times people will say, Rhonda, I can't get my head around divorce. I feel like I need a legal separation. And the thing with that is some states will honor legal separations and some states won't. So you first have to see if that's an option. Physically separating is not a legal separation. It's a separation. But the legal separation is sometimes where people can start to move in that direction. And typically what I see that happens is once they kind of say they're going to go down that path, the true colors of that person, they see even more clearly, as do the people around them. And so, it sometimes then is converted. I would say 99% of the time it is converted to a divorce, but they don't start there. And that's okay too. But the process, at least from where my perspective, is very similar. So like when I'm working with divorce attorneys, whether it's a legal separation in the states that allow that or divorce, the terminology the process for us is the same. The terminology is the same, except at the end you'd have a legal separation document versus a divorce decree. So, it's not a shortcut. It's not, again, I mean, the process is going to be very, very similar, but that's something that I have seen too. And again, I tell people, listen, if you want to start there, good for you. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that as long as your state allows it. Now, I'm in Wisconsin physically. And so here, you can start a legal separation and you can convert it to divorce at any point throughout that process, and even up to some time after the conclusion of the legal separation with just completing an additional document. And throughout the process, anybody can convert it, either party. And so a lot of times it does get converted. But again, you don't have to.
And I've involved with a case right now that lived in a state where they were hitting the year mark and did not divorce. They did move back in together and did reconcile the marriage. But so to your point, so I live in the state of Georgia, and this is a not legal separation state. So you are married or you are not married. You can enter into something called a maintenance. So you and your spouse can go to a mediator and you can kind of mediate out an agreement, but there's no legal ramification if the other person doesn't comply. Mm-hmm. So you can go through that process and like, okay, we saved all this money. We went to a mediator, put it down. Everybody signs the piece of paper. And then if he doesn't give you that child support that he said next month, you have no legal recourse because there's no such thing as a legal separation in the state of Georgia. Whereas in North Carolina, you must be legally separated 1 year before you can even file for divorce. So in that legal separation, it will be that you do to go ahead and divide up assets and child support and alimony and all that kind of stuff. And then again, when that year rolls around, that doesn't mean you're divorced. You would still have to file. You could prolong your legal separation, or you could come back and file. In a case that just recently happened, they were about approaching that year mark and decided to reconcile. That time apart was helpful to the relationship, and it's in a better space. But then on the other times, what I see more with especially men on the autism spectrum, they are so angry that we're in these two separate spaces, that you have taken my money and that I'm having to pay for this for you. And she's doing things that he doesn't like maybe he doesn't think the kids should be in sports activities, and his money is going towards these sports activities, which, he's kept the kids from doing their whole life because he didn't believe in spending money for sports fees. But the kids have wanted to do sports. And now that they're separated, mom's like, yay, we're each going to join a sports team. And there's just like seething over like, how dare you go behind my back and use this child support money for, these sports. And so that anger and resentment builds. And if that continues during that legal separation, you said kind of shows the real person, kind of shows the heart. It's like, I wasn't really in this marriage about you and loving you. It's about saving face. It's about image perception. It's about our church. It's about not getting a divorce at any cost. And I find it interesting when I talk with colleagues who work in the same space I do, but not the faith space. So I was asking, I was like, man, I don't really see a lot of reconciliation. I'm so bummed. And they're like, we do. And they're non-Christians. And I was like, you have more non-Christians reconciling than I have reconciling? He's like, oh yeah, because these guys know their wife will divorce them. In your space, they're so conditioned not to divorce. They're so entitled that there's no way on earth she'll divorce me because of the shame, the brokenness in community. There's not that piece. But this one colleague was saying, oh, in my space, if the wife says, if we don't straighten this out, we're going to divorce, he usually will straighten up because she's serious. But in your faith community, they may not have the support of the community or a pastor that might keep them in an abusive situation.
Gosh, I got to just sit with that.